100 corporations will own and control 2/3 of the manufacturing assets of this society. Wealth and power becoming more and more tightly concentrated every year in America. Of the top 100 money powers in the world, let's say we had 2 blackboards up here, and we want to take the time and list all the nations of the world, right? There's about 150 of them, and we'd rank them in order of their gross national product, what they produce, and we'd be right up there at the top, then the Soviet Union, all the way down to, I don't know, Botswana maybe. And then on this other side, we'd list the top 100 corporations in America. And we put up their gross sales, their assets, and so forth, what they own. And then we merged those 2 lists. We would find that of the top 100 money powers in the world in terms of wealth, 36 of them are no longer countries at all. They're giant American corporations. 18 others of them are European corporations. 54 of the top 100 money powers in the world today are no longer governments. They're giant business companies. 2 more statistics. By 1980, 4 more years again, this is according to the Wharton School of Economics, one of the most prestigious big business institutions in America, 200 corporations will own and control 80% of all the productive assets of the non-communist world. 80%. And if you've been following the news, you know how capitalism and communism are always supposed to be fighting it out. You know, it's the ultimate battle of the 2 systems. If you follow the news, you find out that Pepsi-Cola just opened 3 new plants in Russia. They're making Winston's in Bulgaria now. Ford Motor Company setting up a factory in the Soviet Union. At the address of 1 Karl Marx Plaza in Moscow is the Russian headquarters of the Chase Manhattan Bank. So they're going to own some assets in the communist world too. It's sort of interesting. I think the Soviet party bosses and America's major corporate chieftains get along very well together because they both understand power and how to hold on to it as tightly as possible. Finally, by the year 2001, this, according to the Chamber of Commerce, right from the horse's mouth, 200 American-based multinational corporations will own, this is a direct quote from their chief economist, Judd Polk, 54% of everything worth owning on the planet Earth. 200 corporations. Now, ask yourself, since you're voting, and I think you're probably pretty aware, more so than most Americans, of elected officials. I'm sure you know your congressperson, your senators, your governor, the president, all that. You know our major political figures. Now ask yourself, who the hell are the heads of America's 200 largest corporations? We know a few of them. We know Rockefeller's in there somewhere. We know some family names. There's some Mellons and DuPonts and so forth. But of the top 200 corporations, how many of us even know 5 of the chief executive officers of those corporations? And yet these are the men who are running these companies that in just 25 years are going to own 54% of everything worth owning on the planet Earth. Now you hear a lot about competition, free enterprise. Here's an ad. You know, corporations are on the defensive these days. Remember the old days when they used to sell products, right? Shell, for instance, sold gasoline. Texaco sold gasoline. They don't do that anymore. Shell and Texaco, for instance, now, if you look at their ads, they're working to keep our trust. Shell sponsored bicentennial minute spots. Mobil Oil is selling the free enterprise system. They're all selling their place in the American economic system. They're selling us capitalism. They're not so worried about their products. They're very much on the defensive. Here's an ad. This is from a major oil company. I believe it's Phillips Petroleum. It says, "It's time American industry took a stand for the free enterprise system." And it's about a whole advertising campaign that companies around the country are getting into. Well, that free enterprise system is just a myth. That's like all those other myths from the high school textbook. It doesn't exist anymore. According to the Justice Department, as I said, every goods, service, and industry, with the exception of agriculture, and much of it because of agribusiness is moving in that direction, is the victim of a shared monopoly. 4 firms or less controlling 50% or more of the market. Free enterprise doesn't exist. You know, when the gasoline went up during the energy crisis, when one company raised its price, they all did. They all worked together. You didn't find Texaco selling at 20 cents below Shell. When one steel company raises its price, they all go up. I mean, they don't like to compete. It's not efficient. They like to work together in harmony. It works better for them. Now, according to the Justice Department, again, because of this massive corporate monopoly and collusion, the American public lose $80 billion a year in lost production because it's not efficient for corporate America to produce at maximum capacity. We have plants all over the country operating 20, 25%, 40% of capacity. Meanwhile, we have 7, 8, 9 million people out of work, depending on what statistics you want to use. But they don't want to produce as much as they could because it would lower the price. If they don't produce so much, the price stays up. Now, the interesting thing is they've managed to accomplish this virtually without a shot being fired. You know, they've taken over control of the country. There were the labor wars back in the 30s, but the labor union today doesn't seem that interested in that anymore. Every Wednesday, George Meany goes to the White House to hobnob with President Ford. I mean, I.W. Abel, president of U.S. Steel, or the U.S. Steel just about, the United Steelworkers, either way, he's making $75,000 a year as a representative of the working class from the assembly line. The white flag of defeat hovers over the nation. I mean, I firmly believe that this country has been colonized again 2 centuries after the Revolution. Now, we're more sophisticated. We don't have monarchs, we don't have the robes, we don't have the crowns, but we have a couple hundred giant corporations that represent more wealth and power than King George ever fantasized about back in the 1770s. And now that they've mopped up so efficiently here in America, now that these 200 corporations have cleaned up, they are beginning to look globally. The concept of multinational corporation, I'm sure you've all heard of that. Most of America's largest corporations are multinational. They don't just operate in America anymore. They operate all over the globe. Some of them have affiliates and subsidiaries in 80 or 90 countries around the world. And this is creating a massive crisis in America. And you're not hearing Jimmy Carter and you're not hearing Gerald Ford talk about it. The truth is that American industry is stripping this nation bare of its productive capacity. Right now in Taiwan and Hong Kong and Puerto Rico and countries around the world, there are American plants of all kinds. Zenith is moving out of Buffalo and moving over to Hong Kong because over there they can pay $1 a day for wages to laborers. Here they might have to pay $6 or $7 an hour. So to increase their profits and to get away from any government control and to find cheaper labor pools and so forth and to work hand in hand with some petty dictatorships around the world, America's major corporations are beginning to exit lock, stock, and barrel from the country. Some are even saying that if the government brings any more pressure on them, like taxes and pollution standards, they may move completely out of the country. Mobil Oil threatened this recently. Some of the oil companies are still talking about it to try to stop the Senate from the divestiture legislation that's going on now. Again, a few statistics. In 1960, a US-based multinational corporation invested 11.5 cents abroad for every dollar it invested here at home. And that investment means more jobs. Today, in 1976, for every dollar invested here at home, these same corporations are investing 36 cents abroad, almost triple the amount just over the last 15, 16 years. We're finding now that over 75% of some of our major industries are located abroad, 75% of our electrical industry. When you get color TVs and radios and they say Zenith and RCA, a great bulk of them aren't made in this country anymore. They're made overseas with cheap labor and brought into this country. You notice the price hasn't dropped, even though they're paying less for the labor. They keep that consistent, but the profits are going up. And incidentally, in 75 and 76, corporate profits stood at an all-time high, even in the midst of recession. 40% of the assets of our consumer goods industry located abroad. 33% of the total assets of our chemical industry located overseas. The AFL-CIO estimates that this has cost America upwards of 1 million jobs. 1 million jobs lost to these foreign subsidiaries of American corporations. Other estimates from Congress are even putting it higher. And all this time, as America's businesses begin to move abroad, what is the government of the United States doing? Now, you think that the government might be protecting American jobs, might be trying to save this economy, but not at all. Last year alone, and you hear President Ford, for instance, talk about welfare cheaters, and you have to cut back the massive welfare expenditures and the food stamps and daycare centers and unemployment benefits and all this that people are saying are for freeloaders. Well, they don't talk about the over $50 billion last year that our government gave America's major corporations in the forms of tax breaks, $9 billion alone for the foreign tax credit, massive subsidies to companies that are going under, whose management has boggled it, so we keep them afloat, in terms of all kinds of different investment breaks. There's even an insurance company that comes out of the federal government with the initials, the OPIC, that actually helps insure American corporations to move abroad. Because, you know, it's getting very dangerous over there in many countries. They're starting to nationalize America's corporations if there's a revolution, like they did in Chile, like they did in Cuba. So the OPIC says to America's companies, you want to move abroad? Fine. When you do so, we'll insure your company. And if it's nationalized and confiscated over there, then we'll pay you back for it out of the public treasury. That's on the books. You know, it's sort of in America, we don't seem to learn our lesson because something very similar about the allegiance of America's major corporations arose during World War II. I don't know how many of you saw it. There was an article in about the last 6 months in Penthouse about this, but it originally came out in Senator Hart's banking committee about 1.5 years ago. Top secret government documents were declassified back in 1975 that showed that during World War II, several American corporations, General Motors, ITT, Ford, DuPont, and some others, actually worked with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party and fascist Germany to help build the Nazi war machine. That all the way up to the American Declaration of War, America's corporations were helping produce tanks, guns, airplanes, weapons of every kind for Hitler. At the same time, they were producing weapons here. And they were actually, these documents show, trading the plans back and forth. So that when they made when they made airplanes here, bombers, say, for America, they'd send the plans over to their plant in Germany, which produced anti-aircraft weapons, so that those guns could effectively hit our airplanes. It's been revealed that the bulk of the gas that killed 6 million Jews and millions of other people in World War II was produced by an affiliate of DuPont Chemical in Czechoslovakia during the 30s and 40s. And it's not that these companies didn't know what was happening. There are actually documents that are part of the public record now that were circulated among major executives with General Motors, for instance, that have them outlining how no matter which side won the war, Germany or the United States, they would be positioned in a way that they could hold on to their plants after the war, they could hold on to their assets and continue to produce products no matter which side won. That's how much loyalty they had to the country. Recently, also, Mobil Oil was just shown to have been violating over the last decade systematically American sanctions to Rhodesia. You know, even Secretary of State Henry Kissinger says that no American citizen or corporation can have any dealings at all with Rhodesia because of its white minority rule policy. Well, over the last decade, according to documentation that's just been revealed, Mobil Oil supplied all of the gasoline, all of the diesel fuel, and all of the aviation fuel to the white minority rule government of Rhodesia through a very elaborate scheme and conspiracy in direct violation of American foreign policy. Now, I mentioned who are some of these people who run America's corporations, and let me read you a few quotations. These are definitely quotations from the chairman of the boards of America's largest 200 corporations. Now, you know, every society, every age produces dreamers. Here in America, you know, Jack Kennedy talked about his dream of the new frontier and so forth. Martin Luther King definitely had a dream. I'm sure you've all seen his speech in 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial where he thundered, "I have a dream that one day white children and black children will be together." Well, America's corporate chieftains have dreams too. I mean, they're folks just like us, just average citizens. And I'd like to read you, this is the dream of Carl Gerstacker. This is a direct quote. Carl Gerstacker, chairman of the board of the Dow Chemical Company. And many of you probably remember Dow Chemical from the 1960s and the role it played in making napalm. But he's a dreamer, nonetheless. And this is what he thinks about at night, I guess, when he gets into bed, you know, puts on his pajamas, gets a warm glass of milk. Here's his quote: "I have a dream. I have long dreamed of buying an island owned by no nation and of establishing the world headquarters of the Dow Chemical Company in the truly neutral ground of such an island beholden to no nation or society. If we were located on such truly neutral ground, we could then really operate in the U.S. as U.S. citizens, in Japan as Japanese citizens, in Brazil as Brazilians, rather than being governed by the laws of the United States or any one country." It's Carl Gerstacker's dream for the future. If any of you have seen Rollerball, I don't know if that movie came to town here. It's sort of like 1984. It's about when a couple corporations end up ruling the world. You see, the Rollerball is sort of fanciful, but not that far from reality. And, you know, now that we celebrate 1976, maybe we should look ahead 8 years to 1984. Seems like another key date that we might start looking at as organizers and as people concerned about politics. Here's a quote from a European head of IBM. His name is Jacques Maison-Rouge. And he says that the world's political structures are completely obsolete. They have not changed in at least 100 years and are woefully out of tune with technological progress. Now, in that, I can agree with him. I think there need to be some changes, some international cooperation. But he goes on, the critical issue of our time is the conceptual conflict between the multinational corporation search for global optimization of resources and the independence of nation states. That's how IBM sees the coming battle between the mere nation states like our own and the multinational corporations like IBM. Robert Stevenson, Executive Vice President for International Operations of the Ford Motor Company. It is our goal to be in every single country there is. Iron Curtain countries, Russia, China, it makes no difference to us. We at Ford Motor Company look at a world map without any boundaries. We don't consider ourselves basically an American company. We are a multinational company. And when we approach a government that doesn't like the United States, we always say, well, who do you like? Britain, Germany, France? We carry a lot of flags. We export from every country. That's the Ford Motor Company's view. They have a better idea, definitely. Finally, David Rockefeller. And, you know, the Rockefellers are fabulous. I mean, as a radical myself, as a revolutionary, I always have, and I think a lot of us experience this, a sort of real love-hate relationship with them. Because they represent, I mean, I think they represent the worst. They represent the Tory tradition at its height in America. And yet, they've had it so long. You know, I mean, they're into their third and fourth generation of massive ownership in America. They're so refined, and they say the most amazing things in public that no other corporate chieftain would ever dare say. Remember when Nelson Rockefeller was being approved as vice president? And he sat in front of that Senate committee and defended his wealth by saying that he really wasn't as wealthy as everybody thought, that the recession had really hurt him considerably, that he'd made some very poor art investments, he didn't know what to do. You know, things are looking bad for even the Rockefellers these days. And David Rockefeller says, we must launch a crusade for understanding to explain why global corporations should have freer reign to move goods, capital, and technology around the world without the interference of nation states. But, he goes on to confess, such a crusade calls for the public relations campaign of the century. Now, he's definitely right in that. And in case you don't know it, that public relations campaign of the century has started. You know the Ad Council? You know, Smokey the Bear, you know, Woodsy Owl, they got all those characters, don't catch VD, don't smoke dope, that stuff. Well, they're not only doing that kind of good public service stuff now, they have decided that it's time to sell capitalism to the American people. Beginning this year, working in conjunction with half a dozen major corporations and partially funded by the Commerce Department, the Ad Council is launching a campaign called the American Economic System and Your Part in It. It is $2.5 million. It's gone into the research and development. It is going to last for 5 years. It's the most unprecedented public image campaign in America's history for big business. And they're trying to get the three networks to donate $50 million of free airtime to spots to explain to people like you and me who might be concerned about pollution and so forth and corruption, multinational corporations and all of that, that we've got it all wrong. That, see, the reason why you and I might not like big business or might be concerned about it is just because we're all ignorant. We're all dumb. We don't understand the American economic system. So the Ad Council is going to tell us about it over the next 5 years. At the same time, I'm not sure what's happening in this state, but 7 states have very quietly, under the direction and leadership of something called the Joint Council on Economic Education, which is funded by 50 different banks and corporations, 7 states have passed mandatory free enterprise courses. State legislatures have dictated to schools in their states that teachers, beginning in grade school, beginning at grade 1 and lasting through 12th grade, must teach students about the free enterprise system. Of course, all the textbooks and all the materials and film strips and slides and all that are supplied by these banks and corporations. We're going to have millions of your younger brothers and sisters are going to be propagandized to express their allegiance to big business. Now, I don't think it's just a dollars and cents question. It's just not a political question, what big business has done to this country. That's all bad enough, but I think there's something even more. I think that America's major corporations have in essence issued a death sentence against against the spirit, the individual will, the individual human in this society. We've been turned in the workplace into robots. We've been automatized. Chairman of the board of Phillips Petroleum gives his view of his employees and of humanity. He says, "We expect our employees to exert their utmost efforts on behalf of the company. We expect them not to have outside interests that interfere with their work in the company. The worst thing that can happen is to have an employee that doesn't fit in. A corporation has to have regimentation in order to run. So we would want people that come to work for us to understand that they must adapt to conditions that exist." That's the kind of philosophy and the kind of view of the individual in this society that big business is all about. Now that's the negative aspect, right? I'm sure a lot of that you already know. Some of it you might think, some of it you might disagree with. But those are some of the facts and figures, some of the corporate philosophy in this society. They're very good at holding on to power. They, as I said, they've essentially taken over the society with hardly a whimper of protest from people like us. We've all just given over our rights to them. The testimonial to our society, I think, is in the slogans the corporations set forth. I mean, look at their advertising slogans. Remember, we used to be the great slogans in America were "When in the course of human events," or "We the people," or "Fourscore and 20 years ago." I mean, those were the things. Those are the words that sort of summed up this society. And what are they today? Relief is just to swallow away. Join the Pepsi people, feeling free, feeling free. You know, you get your freedom from Pepsi-Cola now. Geno's gives you freedom of choice. You know, they're all promising us freedom now if we buy their products. We do it all for you from McDonald's. That's nice. It's nice to get all done for us. Maybe someday you could just draw it out into absurdity. The corporate advertising ethic and the corporate worldview. Across the country I was driving in today, you hear about how, you know, we don't want to be like China. Over there they have regimentation. Everybody looks the same. You know, they all wear the same clothes. They're all little robots. Well, I'll tell you, every community in the country I drive into looks just like every other community anymore. We were driving in from the airport today. There was the McDonald's Golden Arches over there, Geno's Hamburgers over there. You know, every place has its Kentucky Fried Chicken. Imagine what the archaeologists in 10,000 years are going to think of our society. Golden arches all over the place. I mean, it's very bizarre. Very bizarre. And I don't think, although these institutions, I want to tell you that I'm very optimistic about the future. Now, I've given you sort of the outlook of what's happening in this country, but I'm very optimistic about the possibility for change, because I truly do believe, like Abraham Lincoln said, that you can fool all the people some of the time, but you can't fool us all the time. And the history of humanity has shown that institutions change, that institutions exist for a time, and then they fade away and new ones rise up. The public opinion can change dramatically. And the public opinion in this country really has changed over the last few years. Remember, 1968, just 8 short years ago, Lou Harris, George Gallup, the polls they were conducting, they asked Americans, what is the major threat to this society? Well, first of all, in the answers of people like our parents, back in 1968, number one major threat was all of us, right? Students. We were the worst. We were tearing the society apart. It was black people, it was feminists, it was homosexuals, it was young people smoking dope, rock and roll music, all of that. But Americans have moved beyond that. Americans have gotten more sophisticated in the last few years. And I think we've started to wake up to the real problem. And I want to, as we're winding this up, I want to read to you some statistics from a public opinion survey that was commissioned by the People's Bicentennial just a little over a year ago. It came out Labor Day in 1975, and it still holds true today. I venture to say that if we took this poll now, we'd find essentially the same results. You know, when a business wants to test a new product, when a politician wants to test his candidacy, he takes a public opinion poll to see how his ideas float, to see whether he's acceptable. Well, we've got some very definite opinions, as you've just heard, about big business in this society. And we decided that we'd put it to the test. We would take one of America's top pollsters, and we would go to him, and we would ask him to conduct a public opinion poll to ask Americans what they think of capitalism. You know, I mean, I don't even know when the last time most of us have even discussed the topic of capitalism, let alone had some pollster call you on the phone and say, "Excuse me, madam, can you tell me what your opinion is of capitalism?" and just start rapping about that. It's a very interesting word, incidentally, capitalism. Just think about that word. and sort of say to yourself, I am a capitalist, because here we are. I mean, we must be. How does that sound to everybody? This is what we found in our survey. Peter Hart conducted it. He's a surveyor, a pollster for CBS, for Newsweek, for Hubert Humphrey, of all people, America's greatest national recycling project. And Peter Hart found this. He found that 57% of the public today believes that both the Democratic and the Republican Party are more in favor of the interests of big business than the average working person in this society. The 58% of the public believes that America's major corporations dominate and determine the actions of our public officials in Washington, while only 25% believe that Washington determines what happens with big business in the economic system, which is just a reversal over what the politicians are telling us these days. 49% say that big business is the source of most of what's wrong in the country today. 49% say they would like to see a new political movement develop in America that would challenge the influence of big business. 41% are in favor of making major adjustments in our economy to try things which have never been tried before. A majority of the American public today says that they would like to see public ownership of oil and other natural resources to take it out of the hands of the few giant energy companies. A majority favors employee control of American corporations, where employees on the workplace make the basic decisions of the company. In other words, democracy at work. 74% would like to see consumers and watchdogs from the community represented on the boards of America's major corporations to make sure that those companies conform to local community guidelines. And 56%, and bear in mind 50% aren't voting today, but 56% said they would vote, and they would definitely or probably support a presidential candidate who ran on a platform of challenging big business and favoring employee control of America's major corporations. Now, to me, this is just a public opinion poll, but it shows that the possibility for a new political movement in America exists today, a movement that can be just as sweeping as the one 200 years ago. In that movement, I think, and I said I'm optimistic, and I sincerely believe that within the next few years there will be a massive, full-blown political movement. It's going to center around a call for economic democracy, for not only having a political system of democracy, of one person, one vote, but instituting a democratic economy in this country. An economy where workers on the job, democratically among themselves, set broad company policy, elect their own management, make the major decisions of the firm, where communities have checks and balances over the companies that exist, that operate out of those communities, so that community standards of pollution control, of hiring, of all the different questions that relate to a community, like here in Ames, are considered. That all of our different rights as workers, as consumers, as average citizens are safeguarded because we have some checks and balances over the economic system, instead of letting it be dictated by a handful of giant corporations controlled by what amounts to 1% of the American people, who are the major stockholders of those corporations. And I don't want you to get me wrong. I don't stand here like a liberal democratic politician and advocate a little piecemeal reform, a little Band-Aid solution here, a little bit of, closing off this gaping wound over there, a little bit of trust busting, a little bit of employee participation. I think it's time that we scrap all those little petty reforms and go all the way. And that we realize that the capitalist economic system we have today cannot exist with the democratic process, that eventually it's going to be one or the other. And if we don't democratize the economic system, then I think we're just going to see the death of our political system as we know it today. As you see from some of the quotations from the corporate chieftains, they don't believe that the democratic political system is really to the advantage of America's corporations. And there's no reason to believe, except for the myths we have in our mind, that people like you and I can't control the places we work in, whether it's a factory, or whether it's a restaurant, or whether it's an office where we're a secretary, or whether it's an architectural firm or an engineering company. There are working examples all over America of democratically controlled companies. It's the best kept secret in the nation. Hardly anybody hears about it. Walter Cronkite hasn't said a peep about it. There's been a small article in the New York Times about it, because not that many people want to talk about it. But democratically controlled companies exist in this country. They're working well, and they're outcompeting their corporate competitors right across the board. There's one of them in Washington called International Group Plans. and it's an insurance company. And if you know anything about business, you know that the sort of the Neanderthal sector of the corporate community is insurance. I mean, it's just way out. It's way back there. It's still in the 1920s. And yet, international group plans is right up front in the struggle for democratizing the economy. It began 12 years ago, 13 years ago. 3 people, each chipped in $1,000. Today, the company has 350 employees, has assets of 40 million. Some of its clients, it's not servicing hippie food co-ops and things like that, mind you. The American Legion uses it. Veterans of Foreign Wars uses it.